Hi girls, this is the last final video of plant reproduction. So in this video we're going to go through fruit formation, dispersal, dormancy and germination. So when we talk about fruit formation, how does that come into plant reproduction? When we talk about the growing ovary inside of the flower, the ovary is going to have the embryo inside it. What happens to this ovary is it becomes completely swollen and it produces more cells around it. So what is the ovary becoming? It is becoming fruit. What allows this to become fruit is the growth promoter auxin. So the ovary that surrounds the growing embryo, it is caused by auxin to form fruit. What does fruit actually do for the seeds? The fruit will protect the seeds. It'll surround the seeds and make sure that the seeds aren't damaged. It will also allow for seed dispersal. How does it allow for seed dispersal? Well, if we talked about animal seed dispersal, we say that the seeds are inside the fruit is eaten by an animal goes down the road and goes to the toilet, the seeds come out in the actual poop of the animal, and the poop is the fertilizer to allow the seed to grow into a new plant. Okay, we're going to touch on that again later on. So when we talk about the development of the fruit, so this is the stage that we were at when we have the flower surrounding the zygote that is growing inside the ovule or the ovary of the flower. So as a flower ages, what happens to it? The petals die, they start to wilt away. Okay, the embryo inside the ovary continues to grow here. We have this continuing here, the petals have fallen off, we have the seed is continuing to form from the growing embryo here, and the ovary has started to swell up. As the ovary continues to swell up, the fruit, the fleshy fruit has formed, which was the ovary. As that continues to mature, we have the fruit is ripe. So this tissue here becomes ripe and it is ready to be eaten. It falls from the tree. So an example here would be the plum. Plum has become ripe and we have the seed inside, which is the stone that has the seed inside it. Okay. Moving on from there, we're going to continue to talk about fruit. There are certain definitions that you need to know for the Leaving Cert course as well. What is false fruit? In general, fruit forms from the swollen ovary of the flower. In certain plants, we have a different scenario where the fruit has formed from a different part of the flower. For example, strawberries form from the receptacle of the flower rather than the ovary of the flower. Okay, false fruit that is formed not from the ovary swelling, from other parts of the flower swelling up. Seedless fruit. So example would be seedless grapes. We all know what they are. You don't want to be eating grapes with seeds in the inside of it. So how do we make them? The actual process is called parthenocarpy. So parthenocarpy is a production of seedless fruit. But how is it done? Man has done it. It has been engineered by humans. This is when the egg is not fertilized. But how do we do it? We genetically modify the plants by special breeding programs so they stop producing seeds inside it. How else? We can spray them with growth regulators, which allows the ovary to swell up without an egg being fertilized, or an ovary with an embryo inside it. So no embryo inside it, and it still allows the ovary to actually swell up without the egg inside it, without the embryo inside it. Okay, so two ways of parthenocarpy are genetically by special breeding programs, or by spraying with growth regulators for the fleshy fruit to form from the ovary without an egg being fertilized inside it. Okay, so we talk a lot about growth regulators and how important they are in the formation of fruit. So what is the function of growth regulators in fruit? So growth regulators actually cause fruit and vegetables to grow bigger. So the more growth regulators that are present, the more fleshy the fruit is going to be. Ethene, the growth regulator, also is it is used to ripen fruit. So again, if I had a ripe banana and I put it into a bag of green tomatoes, what's going to happen to the tomatoes? They're going to ripen, they're going to go red instead. At the same time, using the same example here, ethene, it degreens fruit and vegetables. So if we had, again, a bag of green tomatoes, we want them to be red, I put a ripe banana into the bag, what happens? The ethene that's coming from the banana will cause the breakdown of the chlorophyll in the green tomatoes, so it allows the tomatoes to go red instead. Okay. So next part, we're talking about dispersal. What is the definition of what dispersal is? It is the transfer of seeds or fruit away from the parent plant. So we want the seeds or the fruit to be as far away from the parent plant to expand the population of that plant. So what does it do? What does dispersal do? It increases the chances of survival of a plant. It finds new areas for a plant to grow, a species of plant to grow, and it increases the population of that certain plant, that specific plant. How does dispersal occur? So this is quite similar to pollination. When we talked about pollination, there was wind pollination and there was animal or insect pollination. Here we have 4 different ways that pollen can be dispersed. How a seed can be dispersed. So 4 different dispersal methods. We have wind, we have water, we have animal, and we have self-dispersal. So when we talk about wind dispersal, you'll know all about this already. You think of the perfect example would be a dandelion. You pick a dandelion from the grass, you blow on it. What happens? Those little parachutes that are here, my little drawing, those little parachutes are blown in the wind, carried off, and then a new dandelion will grow across the field. So in wind dispersal, we see the seeds are small and they're light, so they can be carried by the wind. So an example again, the dandelion, they have little parachutes to help them float through the wind. And sycamore, these little helicopter wings. What happens is they fall from the tree and they spin, and they move further away from the parent plant to grow somewhere down the road. Okay, so when we talk about water dispersal, perfect example of this would be a coconut. Coconut tree is beside a river or beside the sea, and a ripe coconut falls from the tree, lands in the water. It is filled with air. It's buoyant. It's going to be carried in that water down the stream, across seas, and then when it reaches land, a new coconut plant will grow as a result. Okay, so in water dispersal, we have air-filled fruit. We see that in the coconut or the water lily, and this air-filled fruit allows it to be buoyant, allows the seed or the fruit to actually float in the water. When we talk about animal dispersal, there are 2 ways this can happen. First one we talked about already here. So if the flesh of the fruit is edible, an animal or us will eat it, and when we excrete out the seeds, those seeds will grow into new plants when we've gone to the toilet. Okay, another way is we go through a field, we come against some goosegrass, and it sticks to our trousers, and then we go down the road and we notice that it's on our trousers, we take it off, and the seeds will grow down the road to expand the plant population. So this happens with animals as well. Animals will pick up the goosegrass on their fur or on their hair and walk down the road, the seeds will fall off, they'll grow into a new plant. Okay, everybody knows what goosegrass is. It's that plant that you would pick up from the ground and stick to your friend's back, and it will stick to them, and then your friend will realise what's on them and then take it off, And the 4th last way of dispersal methods is self-dispersal. So here we have the perfect example would be peas or beans. So peas and beans, as they grow and mature inside their pods, the pods will eventually dry out and pop open. When they pop open, the seeds are catapulted away from the plant and away from where they were grown to form new plants, new peas or new bean plants. Okay. when we talk about dormancy, so dormancy, the actual definition for it is the resting period when seeds undergo no growth and have reduced activity. So this means when the seed has been formed after fertilization, it goes through a period of not doing anything. It stays stationary, does nothing, no plant grows for a while. So this is dormancy. Okay, so it's kind of like when a volcano is dormant, not doing anything. It's sitting in, sitting stagnant. Okay. So, how does this happen in plants? How do seeds actually stay dormant? Okay, it means that inside of that seed there's too much growth inhibitor. It's stopping any growth from happening. It can happen as a result of the testa being way too thick and not allowing water or oxygen into the seed, into the growing parts inside. So that's stopping the plumule and the radicle growing. And if the testa is too tough, it's stopping the testa, it's stopping the radicle and plumule actually growing out of the seed and becoming a plant. So, and the last one, there's not enough of the growth promoters present. So if there's not enough oxygen being made, that means that our plumule and radicle aren't going to grow big as well. So dormancy happens as a result of too much growth inhibitor, not enough growth promoter, the testa, the skin on the outside of the seed being too thick, or the skin on the testa being impermeable to water or oxygen from getting into the growing parts inside of the actual seed. What happens in agriculture? So our farmers, they depend on these seeds. So how do they stop these periods of dormancy? How we can break dormancy is by soaking the seeds in water. So that may break down the testa and allow the water to get into the actual growing parts inside, the plumule and radicle. We can scrape the testa. So if we scrape the testa, you're breaking that outside chamber, outside layer of the seed. So we're letting water and oxygen in, and we're possibly allowing the plumule and radicle to grow out as well. The last one is placing seeds in the fridge. So why would we do this? We will place seeds in fridges to stop our growth promoter being made. So those cold temperatures are stopping our growth, promoter there. We're stopping our growth inhibitor from being made. So if we stop the growth inhibitor being made, that may allow the actual parts of the seed to start growing. So allowing the plumule and radicle to emerge from the actual seed. What are the benefits of dormancy? So why does it happen? What's good about dormancy actually occurring? Well, it avoids harsh conditions. So let's say it's really wintry here and a seed wants to start growing. A seed won't be able to start growing if it's in dormancy. It's going to wait until conditions are more favourable for its growth. Another thing for dormancy, it allows the embryo to mature. So what's going on inside that seed? The plumule and radicle are getting ready to emerge from inside the seed. And what's allowing that to happen, what's allowing those parts to mature, is dormancy as well. Allows time for seed dispersal. So let's say a seed has fallen from the parent plant, but it hasn't been windy out, so it hasn't been carried down the road. An animal hasn't walked by, so it hasn't stuck to them and it hasn't been carried away from the parent plant. So this dormancy allows for an animal or wind or water to come and pick it up and carry it down the road, so it can spread out further, so the population can increase further away from the parent plant. And the last one, it allows for survival of the species. So if it comes kind of back into this one, if we're avoiding those harsh conditions, we're waiting until conditions are more favourable. Once those conditions are favourable, it means that the seed will be able to grow, it won't die, conditions are there for the plant to grow and to thrive. Okay? So once that seed has been dispersed and it's ready to grow, it's gone through its period of dormancy and now conditions are favourable, what happens? Germination happens. Germination is the growth of the embryo after that period of dormancy. What conditions do we need to have present for germination to occur? Well, we need water there. We need oxygen and we need temperature. Favourable temperature would be different for different plants, but between 5 and 30 degrees. So where do we get the water from? From the soil. Oxygen is present in the soil as well. The seed gets the oxygen from inside the soil too. Okay. So once these three conditions are there, that means that germination can occur. We're now going to go through steps of germination. So once those conditions are there, what happens to the seed? So this is the more detailed part of this lesson here. Seeds store food in the form of oil, protein, and starch in the endosperm and the cotyledon. Okay, when water is absorbed by the seed, it activates enzymes. It allows enzymes to come into action. What do those enzymes do? They break oil down into glycerol and 3 fatty acids. They break proteins into their mini amino acids. They break starch down into simple glucose units. So what does the embryo do with all of these products here? It's going to use it for respiration. It's going to use it to grow. So what do we use it for? Glucose and the amino acids, they're used to make cell walls and make more enzymes, and glucose and the fatty acids are going to be used for respiration and to give the growing plant energy as well. So once these enzymes are made and once this respiration is occurring, what happens? Well, the growing plant, the plumule and radicle, are using the energy stored inside the cotyledon and endosperm. So if it's using the food stored in the cotyledon and endosperm, what does that mean that's going to happen to the endosperm and cotyledon? It's going to get smaller. It's going to decrease. The weight of these two parts are going to decrease. The weight of the endosperm and cotyledon, any food storage part of the plant, the weight of these parts are called the dry weight. The dry weight is referred to in this chapter an awful lot. So when we talk about the dry weight of a plant, it's talking about the actual weight of food storage without any water being present there. Okay? So if the weight of the endosperm and cotyledon are decreasing because the plumule and radicle are getting bigger, what's happening to the weight of the plumule and radicle? They're increasing. So it's just like us. We have loads of food in our house. What happens when I eat loads of food? My weight increases. What happens to the weight of the food? The weight of the food decreases because I'm eating it all. Okay, so it's very similar to that. Okay, what happens once this occurs? Once the radicle and plumule are using up that energy reserve that's in the endosperm and cotyledon, the radicle is going to burst open because it's getting much bigger than what the seed can contain. Okay, so what happens to the radicle? It bursts through the testa and it's going to grow downwards due to geotropism. What's going to happen to the plumule? The plumule is going to grow upwards and it is negatively geotropic or positively phototropic because it's going to grow towards the sun and away from the center of gravity. What happens to the plumule? It starts to grow its first leaves. As soon as the leaves start to grow, that means that photosynthesis can occur. When photosynthesis occurs, what does that mean? The plant has started to make its own food again, so its energy reserves can go up again. So that means that the dry weight of the actual plant is going to increase again because it is making its own food storage at this point. So just talking more about dry weight. When we're discussing dry weight, the actual definition for this is the weight of plant material with the water removed. But how do I remove water? If I wanted to actually measure my dry weight, I have to put the seeds or the plants into an oven. Obviously I'm going to be killing the plant if I'm going to do this, but I put it into the oven at 100 degrees Celsius, and when it has a consistent weight, that is the actual dry weight. Okay, when the weight of the dried out parts is stay constant. So let's just look at graphs, and I know graphs are horrible to look at, but this is pretty understandable when you're looking at this one. Okay, so hopefully you'll understand it. So when we talk about the dry mass or the dry weight of a germinating seed, it starts off as a normal seed. Okay, so that means that we have a pretty high dry weight or dry mass because the cotyledon and endosperm are full of that food reserve still. But what happens between day 0 and 3? The actual radicle starts to emerge from inside of the seed, and as a result, that means that the plant is using up its energy reserves in the cotyledon and endosperm, so the radicle and plumule can start to grow. That continues to happen. Radicle gets bigger by day 3. By day 6 of germination, we see the cotyledon and endosperm has kind of started to shrivel up because there's not enough food stored in it anymore. So it has gotten smaller. We have the plumule starting to grow, and the radicle has continued to grow. By after day 6, so let's say by day 9, we have the plumule has completely emerged and it is over the soil. It has started to grow its first leaves. What does that mean? Photosynthesis has started to happen. So that means that the energy reserves, it went from having loads up here when it was just a seed because the energy was stored in the cotyledon and endosperm. It decreased because the plumule and radicle were using that energy reserve to become bigger. Once photosynthesis starts to occur again, we have the energy stored increases again because photosynthesis is producing chemical energy from the sun's energy from chlorophyll present in or any green parts of the shoot. Okay, so that is how the dry mass will go from very high to very low and start going up again once photosynthesis starts to occur again. In this graph here, this is looking at the difference between the weight of the embryo and the difference between and the weight of the endosperm or cotyledon. So we have the weight of the endosperm and cotyledon was very high at the start of germination because all of that food was stored in the cotyledon and endosperm before the plumule and radicle began to get bigger. Then we have the radicle and plumule are starting to grow. What's happening as a result? The growing plant is using the energy stored in the endosperm and cotyledon. So we have the energy reserve has decreased, whereas the parts of the embryo, the radicle and plumule, are starting to get bigger. So the actual weight of them are increasing. Okay. The last part that I want to go through in this chapter is seedling growth. So there's two different types of seedling growth. We have one type where the cotyledon remains underneath the soil, and the second one is where the cotyledon actually comes out of the soil once the plumule and radicles start to grow. So for the first one, when we say cotyledon stays in the soil, an example of a plant that this happens in is the broad bean plant. So what happens is the seed is growing. The seed is growing and then the radicle starts to emerge. Once that radicle emerges, then we have the plumule starts to grow. The space between where the cotyledon and the plumule is called the epicotyl. So that epicotyl is bringing the plumule out and up into the soil. Once the plumule is out in the soil, we have the first leaves, the true leaves have started to grow, and then at this stage, once the leaves are starting to grow, then photosynthesis will start to occur. So we see this in the broad bean, and it means that the cotyledon will remain under the soil. In the second type here, we have the cotyledon moves above ground. We see, and this in an example would be the sunflower. Sunflower seeds actually has a bit of a flesh to the seed itself, and we call that fleshy part of the sunflower seed the pericarp. Now that's not specific to sunflower seeds, it's the same with a few different seeds where we have some flesh around it. It's called the pericarp. Okay, so where we have the cotyledon or the seed growing underneath the soil, the radicle again emerges from the seed, and the radicle will continue to grow, and the space between the actual cotyledon and the space between the cotyledon and the radicle is the hypocotyl. So this part here is called the hypocotyl. This the region between the cotyledon and the radicle. Okay. So once that continues to grow down, then we see that the cotyledon is push up by the radicle that's growing down. Once that has emerged from the soil, the pericarp, the outer part of the seed here, it falls off, and we have the cotyledons they are naked now, basically above the soil. So the cotyledons are let out here. Cotyledons will actually start to photosynthesize now. These aren't the first leaves really of the sunflower plant. The first leaves are going to come from the cotyledon. So from those cotyledons that are growing here, we have the plumule starts to shoot up from the cotyledons that are here, and we have the first foliage leaves that will come up as a result of the plumule coming out of the cotyledons there. So we have two types of seedling growth. Seedling growth 1 would be where the cotyledon remains underneath the soil. An example of a plant that we see this in is the broad bean. And then the second type of seedling growth is seen in the sunflower, and this is seen where the cotyledon actually will emerge from the soil and come out above ground. Okay girls, that's everything. Let me know if I can help you with any questions you're stuck on.